The studio lights were so bright that Bruce Lee could feel the heat against his face. He sat quietly in the guest chair, one ankle resting over the other, his hands relaxed against the arms of the chair. Around him, cameras moved silently. Technicians whispered into headsets. The audience waited behind the lights, excited to see the man Hollywood had begun calling one of the fastest martial artists alive. Bruce looked calm, almost too calm. But he knew something was different about this interview. The producer had warned him before the cameras started rolling. "Bruce, they're going to ask you about fighting." Bruce had smiled. "They always do." The producer hesitated. "This time they may push you." Bruce simply nodded. "Then they will learn something." Across the stage, the host sat behind his polished wooden desk. He adjusted his tie, looked toward the camera, and smiled. The red light turned on. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special guest." The audience applauded. An actor, a martial artist, a teacher, and according to some people, the fastest man in Hollywood. The applause grew louder. The camera moved toward Bruce. He smiled politely. The host leaned forward. "Bruce Lee." More applause. Bruce gave a small bow of his head. "Thank you." The host laughed. "You don't seem nervous." Bruce looked at him. "Should I be?" The audience laughed. The host grinned. "Well, perhaps not, but I have to admit something. Every time I see you on screen, I wonder how much of that is real." Bruce's expression changed slightly. "Which part?" "The speed, the power, the whole thing." Bruce leaned back. "The whole thing." "Yes." The host looked toward the audience. "Some people say movies make martial artists look much more dangerous than they really are." A few people laughed. Bruce didn't. Instead, he asked quietly, "Do you believe that?" The host paused. "I believe cameras can make almost anything look impressive." Bruce nodded. "They can. And you?" "I don't need a camera." The audience reacted immediately. A few people laughed nervously. The host raised his eyebrows. "That sounds like a challenge." Bruce smiled. "No, it's an observation." The audience laughed again. But then a woman's voice came from the other side of the stage. "Or maybe it's confidence." Bruce turned. Pam Grier was sitting several feet away. She had been invited onto the program as another guest, and until that moment, she had remained mostly quiet. She leaned forward. Confidence can look a lot like arrogance when someone talks about himself that way. The studio became noticeably quieter. The host looked between them. "Well," Pam continued, "I've watched his movies. He's impressive, but movies are movies." Bruce studied her for a moment. "You're right." Pam seemed surprised. "I'm right." "Yes." Bruce smiled. "A movie is not a real fight." The host nodded. "Exactly." Bruce continued. "But a real fight is also not what most people think it is." Pam crossed her arms. "And what do you think it is?" Bruce looked directly at her. "Control." The word landed softly, but somehow it sounded heavier than shouting. Pam smiled. "Control." Bruce nodded. "The ability to control fear, anger, ego, your body, your mind." Pam shook her head. "That sounds good for television." A few audience members laughed. Bruce didn't react. He simply said, "Then perhaps television needs to hear it." The host suddenly realized he had something much bigger than a normal interview. He leaned toward the microphone. Bruce, are you saying a fighter shouldn't be angry? No. Shouldn't be afraid? No. Then what should he do? Bruce's eyes narrowed slightly. Understand those feelings before they control him. The host smiled. That sounds philosophical. Bruce shrugged. Fighting without understanding yourself is just violence. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Pam broke the silence. So if someone attacks you, what do you do? Bruce looked at her. I stop the attack. And if they keep coming, I stop them again. And if they don't stop? Bruce smiled. Then I become very difficult to stop. The audience burst into laughter. Even Pam smiled. But there was something in Bruce's eyes that told her he wasn't joking. The host saw the tension and decided to push harder. Let's make this interesting. Bruce looked at him. The host pointed toward the open space between the chairs. People watching tonight want to know whether what you do is real. Bruce glanced at the empty floor. You want me to demonstrate? The host nodded. Just something simple. Bruce stood. The audience applauded. Pam also stood. The host looked surprised. Pam said, "Why should he be the only one demonstrating?" The audience reacted. Bruce looked at her. She stepped forward. I don't believe in letting someone build a reputation without testing it. The host laughed nervously. Ladies and gentlemen. But Bruce raised one hand. It's okay. Pam stood directly across from him. The cameras moved closer. The audience became silent. Bruce lowered his hands. He wasn't preparing to fight. He was simply standing. Pam noticed. You're not going to get ready. Bruce answered. I already am. She smiled. Confident. Relaxed. Pam took another step forward. Then another. Bruce didn't move. The host whispered into his microphone. This is getting interesting. And then, Pam suddenly reached toward Bruce. The audience gasped. Bruce moved. Not backward. Not forward. Sideways. In less than a second, he had shifted out of her reach. Pam turned. Bruce was already standing several feet away. The audience exploded with laughter and applause. Pam looked surprised. You moved. Bruce smiled. You tried to touch me. I barely moved. You still tried. The host laughed. Bruce, do that again. Bruce shook his head. That's not the lesson. Pam looked at him. What lesson? Bruce stepped closer. Your first instinct was to attack. Pam raised an eyebrow. And yours? My first instinct was to understand. That answer changed the room. The laughter disappeared. Pam stared at him. Bruce continued. If I react before I understand, then I'm not controlling myself. I'm simply responding. The host looked toward the camera. The audience was completely silent. Then Pam said something that changed everything. Maybe you're afraid of being hit. A few people gasped. Bruce's expression became serious. Maybe. Pam stepped closer. Maybe the famous Bruce Lee doesn't want to find out what happens when someone actually fights back. Bruce looked at her for several seconds. Then he smiled. Maybe. She expected an argument. Instead, Bruce walked back toward his chair. That confused everyone. The host looked at him. That's it. Bruce sat down. That's enough. Pam shook her head. You're walking away. Bruce looked at her. Walking away is sometimes harder than fighting. The studio fell silent again. And then the host asked the question nobody expected. Bruce, are you afraid? Bruce looked directly into the camera. Yes. The audience became completely still. Bruce continued. I am afraid sometimes. A pause. But fear doesn't embarrass me. He looked toward Pam. What embarrasses me is allowing fear to decide who I become. Pam's expression changed. For the first time that evening, she wasn't looking at him like an opponent. She was listening. And the audience was listening too. A quick question for everyone watching. If you were sitting in that studio, whose side would you be on? Bruce or Pam? Before continuing, hit like if you think Bruce was right about controlling anger rather than reacting to it. And don't just watch silently. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. New York, London, Los Angeles, India, Brazil, South Africa, or somewhere else. And if you enjoy dramatic stories about legendary figures, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, back inside the studio, something was about to happen that nobody expected. Pam slowly walked back toward Bruce. But this time, there was no anger in her face. There was curiosity. She stopped beside his chair. You really believe control is stronger than aggression? Bruce looked up at her. I know it is. Pam crossed her arms. Then prove it. Bruce smiled. That's exactly what I don't need to do. The host stared at him. Why? Bruce looked toward the audience. Because if I spend my life proving that I am strong, then I am still trying to convince myself. The words seemed to hit everyone differently. The host slowly lowered his microphone. Pam said nothing. Bruce leaned forward. Real strength doesn't need an audience. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to disappear. There was only silence. Then Pam extended her hand. Bruce looked at it. He shook it. The audience erupted. But Bruce wasn't finished. He turned toward the camera. You don't become strong by learning how to hurt people. He paused. You become strong when you no longer need to. The applause grew louder. The host stood. Pam smiled. And somewhere behind the cameras, one producer whispered, we just got the moment. But none of them knew yet how powerful that moment would become. Because the real confrontation had never been between Bruce Lee and Pam Grier. It had been between ego and discipline. And Bruce had just shown everyone which one he believed would win. The applause slowly faded. Bruce Lee remained seated, his expression calm. Pam Grier returned to her chair, but something had changed. The playful tension that had existed only minutes earlier was gone. Now there was something deeper in the room. Respect. The host looked from Bruce to Pam and then toward the audience. Well, he said, trying to recover his composure, I certainly didn't expect tonight to turn into a lesson in philosophy. Bruce smiled. Most important lessons do. The audience laughed softly. But the host wasn't ready to let the subject go. He leaned forward. Bruce, you've said something tonight that interests me. You said real strength means not needing to hurt someone. Bruce nodded. Yes. But isn't that difficult for a man whose entire career is built around fighting? Bruce looked at him. My career isn't built around fighting. The host raised his eyebrows. No. No. Bruce paused. My career is built around showing people what the human body and mind can become. The host looked impressed. And fighting. That's only the language. Pam suddenly spoke. Then why does everyone associate you with violence? Bruce turned toward her. Because violence is easier to understand than discipline. That answer silenced the room again. Pam leaned forward. Explain. Bruce folded his hands. Anyone can become angry. He paused. Anyone can throw a punch. Another pause. But controlling yourself when you're angry. He shook his head. That takes practice. Pam studied him. You make it sound simple. It isn't simple. Bruce's voice became quieter. That's why people avoid it. The host looked toward the audience. Several people were nodding. Then he asked, "Did you always have this kind of control?" Bruce smiled. No. That answer surprised everyone. The host laughed. Really? Really? Bruce leaned back. When I was younger, I wanted to win every argument, every fight, every challenge. Pam smiled. Sounds familiar. Bruce laughed. Yes, I was young. The audience laughed with him. But eventually, Bruce continued, I realized something. What? Bruce looked at his hands. The person I was fighting most often was myself. The room became quiet. Pam's smile disappeared. Bruce continued. I wanted respect. I wanted people to understand me. I wanted to prove that an Asian man could stand in front of an American audience and be taken seriously. The host's expression changed. Bruce wasn't joking anymore. There were times when people looked at me and saw only a stereotype. He looked toward the audience. They saw a Chinese face. They saw a martial artist. They saw someone they thought they already understood. His voice remained calm. But they didn't know me. Pam listened carefully. Bruce continued. And sometimes, when people underestimate you again and again, you begin to believe that the only way to make them respect you is to become louder. He paused. Stronger. Another pause. More dangerous. The host asked quietly, And did you? Bruce smiled. For a while, the audience remained silent. I learned that being dangerous could make people afraid. Bruce looked toward Pam. But fear isn't respect. Pam nodded slowly. That sentence seemed to stay with her. The host looked at Bruce. So what changed? Bruce thought for a moment. Someone challenged me. The host smiled. Who? Bruce's expression became distant. Life. The audience laughed softly. But Bruce didn't. Life has a way of putting you in situations where your strength isn't enough. He looked toward the camera. You can be faster than someone. You can be stronger. You can be smarter. But there will always be something you cannot control. He paused. And that's when you discover whether your strength is real. The host sat back. For the first time that night, he wasn't trying to create controversy. He was simply listening. But Pam wasn't finished. She looked at Bruce. You keep talking about control. Bruce nodded. What happens when someone crosses a line? Bruce looked at her. Then you stop them. So there is a moment when you fight. Yes. And how do you know when that moment comes? Bruce answered immediately. When walking away would put someone else in danger. Pam nodded. And if it's only your pride? Bruce smiled. Then pride can take the hit. The audience reacted with a low murmur. Pam looked down. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she asked, Have you ever walked away from a fight? Bruce laughed. Many times. even when you knew you could win. Especially then. The host smiled. Why especially? Bruce looked directly at him. Because winning can become addictive. The studio became quiet. Bruce continued. You win once and people applaud. You win again and they call you powerful. You win again and you start believing you must always win. His expression hardened. And then one day, you don't fight because you need to. He paused. You fight because your ego needs the applause. Pam slowly nodded. That was the moment she understood what Bruce had been trying to tell her. He wasn't afraid of confrontation. He was afraid of becoming dependent on it. What do you think? If someone publicly challenged you and insulted you in front of millions of people, would you walk away? Or would you stand your ground? Pause the story for a second and vote in the comments. 1. Walk away. 2. Stand your ground. 3. Only respond if someone crosses the line. And if Bruce's philosophy makes sense to you, hit like. Subscribe if you're enjoying this story. And most importantly, tell us where you're watching from. Write your city and country in the comments. We want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's return to the studio. Because Pam was about to ask Bruce the one question that would change the entire conversation. She leaned toward him. Bruce. Yes. What if someone attacked you right now? The host's eyes widened. The audience reacted immediately. Bruce didn't move. Pam continued. What if there were no cameras? Bruce smiled slightly. There are always cameras. The audience laughed. Pam shook her head. You know what I mean. Bruce nodded. I do. She stood. The audience grew quiet. The host looked nervous. Pam. She raised one hand. Relax. Then she looked at Bruce. I want to understand something. Bruce stood slowly. Okay. Pam stepped into the open space. If you really believe control is more important than winning. She paused. Show me. Bruce looked at her. What do you want me to show you? How quickly you can stop someone without hurting them. The host stared. Bruce considered it. Then he nodded. Fine. The audience leaned forward. Bruce positioned himself several feet away. His hands remained low. Pam raised her hands. The host whispered, Ladies and gentlemen. The cameras moved closer. Pam stepped forward. Bruce didn't move. She suddenly reached toward him. Bruce shifted. Her hand passed through empty air. Pam turned. Bruce was already behind her. She spun around. Bruce was standing exactly where he had been before. The audience gasped. Pam tried again. This time faster. Bruce stepped aside. Again. She reached. Again. Nothing. Bruce never struck her. Never pushed her. Never even raised his fist. Pam became frustrated. She attacked more quickly. Bruce continued moving. One step. One turn. One breath. That was all. Finally, Pam stopped. She looked at him. You're not fighting me. Bruce smiled. No. Why? Because you don't need to be hurt. Pam lowered her hands. But I attacked you. Yes. And you're not angry. Bruce shook his head. No. Why? Bruce looked at her. Because I understood what you were trying to do. Pam's expression softened. What was I trying to do? Bruce answered. You wanted to know whether I was pretending. She stared at him. And Bruce smiled. Now you know. The audience erupted in applause. But Pam didn't clap. Instead, she looked at Bruce with something close to disbelief. You could have hit me. Yes. You could have embarrassed me. Yes. You could have made yourself look stronger. Yes. But you didn't. Bruce shook his head. That wasn't the point. Pam looked toward the audience, then back at Bruce. What was the point? Bruce answered quietly. To show you that I didn't have to. The studio went silent. No applause. No laughter. Nothing. For several seconds, there wasn't even a whisper. Then the host slowly stood. He looked toward the audience. Ladies and gentlemen. He stopped. He seemed unable to find the right words. Pam walked toward Bruce. She extended her hand. This time, Bruce didn't hesitate. They shook hands. Pam leaned closer. You know something. Bruce smiled. What? I came here expecting to challenge you. Bruce nodded. And she looked at him. I think you challenged me instead. Bruce smiled. Then we both learned something. The audience finally erupted. People stood. Some applauded. Some shouted. The host looked overwhelmed. But then something unexpected happened. The studio lights suddenly dimmed. One of the cameras stopped. A producer rushed across the floor. The host looked toward the control room. What happened? No one answered. Then the lights returned. But the atmosphere had changed. Bruce looked toward the camera. The red light was still on. He realized millions of people were still watching. He leaned slightly toward it. And he said, if you're watching this. The studio became silent again. Don't spend your life trying to prove you're stronger than everyone else. He paused. Spend it becoming strong enough that you don't need to prove anything. Pam stood beside him. The host stared. Bruce continued. Your greatest opponent isn't the person standing across from you. He touched his chest. It's the part of yourself that wants to be seen. Then he stepped back. The camera slowly zoomed in. Pam looked at him. And for the first time that night, she wasn't smiling because she had won an argument. She was smiling because she had understood something. The fight everyone expected had never happened. And somehow, that made the moment more powerful than any fight could have been. But the night wasn't over. Because backstage, after the cameras stopped rolling, Pam Grier was waiting for Bruce. And she had one final question. A question she didn't want the audience to hear. A question that would force Bruce to reveal something he had never said on television before. The cameras were off. The applause had disappeared. Only a few studio lights remained on as Bruce Lee stood near the stage, quietly speaking with a producer. Pam Grier hadn't left. She was standing several feet away, watching him. For the first time that evening, there was no audience between them. No cameras. No host. No performance. Just two people trying to understand what had happened. Bruce. He turned. Yes. Pam walked toward him. Can I ask you something? Bruce smiled. You've been asking me questions all night. She laughed softly. This one is different. Bruce waited. Pam looked toward the empty audience. Why didn't you get angry? Bruce was silent for a moment. Then he answered. Because I understood what you were trying to do. Pam frowned. What was I trying to do? You wanted to know if I was real. She looked at him. And Bruce smiled. Now you know. Pam shook her head. You could have embarrassed me. Yes. You could have hit me. Yes. You could have made everyone believe you were stronger. Bruce nodded. I could have. Then why didn't you? Bruce looked at her. Because I didn't come here to prove that I'm better than you. Pam lowered her eyes. Then what did you come here for? Bruce answered quietly. To be myself. That answer stopped her. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Pam said, I spent years fighting people who wanted to tell me what I could be. Bruce nodded. I understand. They wanted me in a certain box. Bruce smiled. And you fought your way out. Yes. He looked at her carefully. But sometimes. He paused. When you've spent years fighting against a box, you start seeing boxes everywhere. Pam stared at him. You think I saw you as another box. I think you saw me as someone you needed to defeat. Pam slowly smiled. Maybe I did. Bruce laughed. Then tonight was useful. How? Because now you don't have to. Pam extended her hand. Bruce shook it. This time there was no challenge in the gesture. Only respect. One final question for everyone watching. If someone embarrassed you publicly, would you fight back or stay calm? Comment 1 if you would walk away. Comment 2 if you would stand your ground. Comment 3 if you would respond only when absolutely necessary. And if Bruce's message means something to you, hit like. Subscribe for more dramatic stories about legendary figures. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Write your city and country in the comments. Now let's return to that unforgettable night. Pam looked at Bruce one last time. What's the strongest thing a fighter can learn? Bruce didn't hesitate. We're not to fight. Pam nodded. And the second strongest? Bruce smiled. To know why you're fighting when you do. Then he walked away. Pam remained there for a moment, watching him disappear behind the curtain. She had entered the studio, expecting a confrontation. Instead, she had discovered something she hadn't expected. Bruce Lee wasn't trying to convince anyone that he was dangerous. He didn't need to. His greatest demonstration had been the moment when he had every reason to react. And chose not to. The next morning, the producers were already talking about the broadcast. People had called the station. Others wanted the footage. Everyone was discussing the same moment. But strangely, they weren't talking about Bruce's speed. They weren't talking about how quickly he had moved. They weren't even talking about the challenge. They were talking about the moment he could have struck. And didn't. The host watched the recording again. He leaned back in his chair. Do you know what the strange thing is? A producer looked at him. What? We thought the fight would be the biggest moment. The producer smiled. There wasn't a fight. The host nodded. Exactly. He looked toward the empty chair where Bruce had been sitting. That was the fight. Bruce never needed to throw a punch that night. He had already made his point. Strength wasn't about making another person feel weak. Speed wasn't about showing everyone how fast you could move. And victory wasn't always about defeating someone standing across from you. Sometimes the real opponent was anger. Sometimes it was pride. Sometimes it was the desperate need to prove yourself. And Bruce Lee understood something that very few people ever learn. You can win an argument and still lose yourself. The studio audience had expected a spectacle. They got a lesson. Pam Grier had expected to challenge Bruce. Instead, Bruce challenged her, and everyone watching, to think differently about strength. And when the cameras finally went dark, the room became completely silent. No one had been knocked down. No one had been defeated. Yet somehow, everyone knew they had witnessed something powerful. Bruce Lee looked toward the empty studio one final time. Then he walked away. Not as the man who had won a fight, but as the man who had shown millions that sometimes the greatest victory is having the power to strike and choosing not to. And that was the moment the studio went silent.